At 02:17 a.m., December 14th, 1943 on Bougainville, the jungle was breathing like a living organism, humidity at 92% air thick enough to drink darkness soaked into the trees so deeply it felt solid. The Marines of the 3rd Raider Battalion were pinned 40 men flattened against the mud, inside a perimeter no larger than a tennis court. Every movement calculated, every breath shallow, because one shot, just one, would bring a Japanese response measured not in bullets, but in casualties. The sniper had already killed 2 men before midnight. The first shot came from somewhere above the canopy angle estimated at 70 degrees distance, roughly 38 yards. The second shot came 90 minutes later. Same direction, same elevation, same precision. A Type 97 sniper rifle with a 2.5x scope firing 6.5 mm Arisaka rounds, capable of punching through softwood at close range. He was patient, he was calm, he was hunting. And that is when Private First Class Joseph T. Orchard raised not a rifle, not an M1 Garand weighing 9.5 pounds with an unmistakable sonic signature, not a Thompson whose 68 decibel muzzle flash could light up an entire tree line. He raised a bow, a longbow, 48 pounds draw weight, homemade string, hand-fletched arrows, something so absurd in a modern war that even the night seemed to hold its breath. The platoon leader stared at Orchard like the man had lost his mind, whispered through clenched teeth, "If you miss, we all die." Orchard said nothing. He simply checked the direction of the wind, barely 1 mile per hour, drifting east, consistent enough for a clean shot, and sighted up into a tangle of branches 50 feet overhead. The Japanese sniper had shifted just slightly enough for Orchard to catch the glint of metal, maybe a belt hook or the bayonet lug reflecting moonlight for a fraction of a second, no more than 0.2. That micro glint was the difference between living and dying. That was all he needed. He drew the bowstring with a slow, even pull, tension humming across the wood. The arrowhead a steel tip shaped for penetration angled upward. His breathing stopped. His heartbeat slowed. The jungle, usually a riot of insects and distant gunfire, went strangely silent. Then he released. A snap so tiny it barely registered. The arrow left the bow at 92 meters per second, covering 38 yards, in 0.41 seconds, straight true silent. It struck the sniper beneath the right collarbone, passing through the lung and heart, pinning the man against the trunk for a full second before gravity peeled him away. He fell 14 meters, hitting branches at 7, then 5, then 0. The Marines didn't cheer, they didn't move, they waited. 30 seconds, 40. Listening for the inevitable retaliation. None came. The perimeter stayed quiet. Orchard had just done something that didn't exist in field manuals, didn't exist in training programs, something that defied the logic of every officer present. He killed a Japanese sniper at night in dense jungle without firing a single round, without revealing a position, without giving the enemy the faintest idea where the shot came from. And it wasn't luck. The sniper had been positioned in a typical Imperial Japanese Army tree-hide height, between 12 and 17 meters, using an elevated firing wedge carved into a banyan limb. Their doctrine stressed 3 things: elevation, concealment, and auditory traps. They expected rifles. They expected muzzle flashes. They expected return fire. They never expected an arrow. Not in World War II. Not from a US Marine. Not from a man who grew up hunting mule deer in the ranges of Idaho, where hitting a target at 40 yards in twilight was a normal Tuesday evening. For the Marines on that muddy perimeter, the kill changed everything instantly. Before Orchard's shot, the Japanese sniper had total fire superiority over the American position. The Japanese could kill a Marine every few hours without consequence. It was psychological warfare as much as tactical. One hidden man stalled 40 trained soldiers. One vantage point shut down an entire patrol route. One set of crosshairs forced a company to crawl rather than walk. But Orchard, with a weapon weighing a fraction of the rifles around him, shut all of it down in less than a second. And as the body of the sniper lay still in the undergrowth, the platoon finally exhaled. The tension didn't fade, it snapped. What Orchard had done was impossible according to every rule of modern infantry combat. This wasn't 1812, this wasn't frontier skirmishing, this was the Solomon Islands in 1943, where machine guns and mortars rewrote the value of stealth. Yet the deadliest moment of the night belonged to a silent weapon older than gunpowder. The lieutenant knelt beside Orchard, whispering so softly it barely carried through the mud. "We're not done. If there's one up there, there's more." Because Japanese sniper doctrine in the Pacific almost always deployed them in pairs, 1 shooter, 1 spotter. If Orchard had killed the shooter, the spotter would either reposition or counterattack. Both options were lethal for the Marines, which meant the next minutes mattered more than the shot itself. Orchard wasn't a myth yet. He wasn't a legend. He wasn't the silent hunter, the name he would later earn. He was just a 24-year-old private with a bow and a skill no one in his battalion believed in until that moment. And now, for the first time in hours, the perimeter had a chance to breathe. If you believe the smallest, most unlikely tools can change the outcome of a battle, comment the number 7. If you think it was just reckless luck, hit like. And if you want to see how this impossible bowman took down more snipers in the nights that followed, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss part 2. By dawn on November 1st, 1943, when the first wave of Marines hit the beaches of Bougainville, no one, not a single intelligence officer, not a single regimental commander, understood the scale of the battlefield they were stepping into. The island was a maze of rainforest, volcanic ridges and swamp. 85% of the terrain was classified as non-navigable. The canopy rose 40 to 60 meters overhead. The underbrush formed walls, not foliage. Visibility in daylight often fell below 20 yards. At night, visibility dropped to almost zero. And inside that terrain, Japanese snipers thrived. Bougainville wasn't a minor outpost. It was a fortress. The Imperial Japanese Army had poured more than 17,000 troops into the northern and central regions, including veteran units from the 6th Division that had fought in China for years before the Pacific Campaign. Their sniper doctrine was refined, brutal and disciplined. They didn't look for high kill counts, they looked for control, for paralysis, for fear. A single sniper positioned correctly could stop an entire battalion from advancing for a full day. And on Bougainville they had dozens. By the time Orchard's battalion arrived in late November, American casualties from sniper fire alone had topped 100 in less than 10 days. That number wasn't from firefights. It wasn't from ambushes. It was from cold surgical shots delivered from branches, vines, and concealed nests built 10 to 15 meters up. Shots timed to movement patterns mapped meticulously through weeks of observation. The Japanese logged everything: footstep rhythms, latrine routes, water-fetching routines, guard rotations. Every time a Marine sneezed, scratched, or wiped sweat, someone in a tree was watching, waiting. The Type 97 sniper rifle was built for this terrain. It weighed 8.8 pounds, chambered a 6.5x50 Emlomed Arasaka round, with minimal recoil and low flash signature. At typical jungle distances, 20 to 50 yards, it was devastatingly accurate. The muzzle report was soft compared to American rifles. In dense canopy, the sound refracted, bounced, spread. Marines often couldn't identify the direction of the shot for 8 to 10 seconds, sometimes longer. In jungle warfare, that delay was fatal. Now contrast that with the American arsenal. The M1 Garand weighed 9.5 pounds, loaded, fired a .30, 06 round with a sonic signature that echoed for hundreds of yards. A single shot could reveal a position across an entire ridge. The Thompson submachine gun fired .45 ACP, creating a muzzle flash that lit up tree trunks. The bar, the Marines' workhorse, was a beacon at night. Every American weapon shouted. Every Japanese sniper relied on silence. This imbalance created what officers called the Bougainville Gap, the tactical disadvantage Marines suffered whenever they engaged in thick vegetation. Japanese riflemen could fire without being seen. American units couldn't fire back without being found. That's what PFC Joseph Orchard walked into. Orchard didn't come from a lineage of marksmen. He wasn't a national champion. He didn't have formal training. He was a kid from Idaho who grew up hunting mule deer on ranges where a 40-yard shot required instinct honed by repetition, not theory. He built his own arrows during winters when temperatures dropped below -10. His father taught him to track by listening to wind hit antlers at dusk. By the time he was 15, he could hit a tin can in low light at 30 yards with a hand-carved bow. But none of that mattered when he enlisted in 1942. The Marines weren't looking for bow hunters. They were looking for riflemen, machine gunners, radio operators. Orchard was assigned as a rifleman with no special designation. He carried an M1 like everyone else. The bow came later. He didn't bring it from Idaho. He made it. Or rather, he rebuilt it. He had pieces shipped to him, a laminated longbow stave, unfinished arrow shafts, broadheads, fletching glue, all packed inside a crate labelled spare personal equipment. The quartermaster looked at the contents and laughed. "You planning to hunt coconuts?" Orchard didn't bother explaining. He just nodded. The truth was simpler. He understood something his officers didn't. Noise kills, noise brings retaliation. Noise in a jungle full of Japanese listening posts was suicide. A single unsuppressed rifle shot at night could draw counterfire from an entire platoon. And Orchard had seen too many men die in situations where silence would have saved them. The bow wasn't a gimmick. It was a tool designed for one environment night. Bougainville nights were a different world. Temperature dropped into the 70s, but humidity stayed near 100%. The air tasted metallic. The jungle swelled with sound, frogs, cicadas, birds, but those sounds created a baseline. Any disruption, the click of a rifle safety, the scrape of a boot, the metallic shift of a sling became obvious against the sonic background. Japanese snipers exploited that. They could hear Marines reposition from 50 to 70 yards away, but a bow had no signature, no flash, no smoke, no casing, no reload sound, no muzzle blast that ricocheted off trunks like thunder. It was invisible. And that invisibility was something the Marines didn't realize they needed until Orchard proved it. Before his first kill, the Japanese sniper threat in Orchard's sector was dire. In the 48 hours leading up to that night, the sniper teams had killed 6 men and wounded 4 more. The Marines couldn't advance. They couldn't rotate patrols. They couldn't evacuate the wounded. Every time someone raised a helmet above the earthworks, a sniper fired within 2 seconds. The battalion commander estimated that without intervention, casualties would rise by 20 to 30% within the next 72 hours. That was the setting. A jungle designed to swallow sound. Snipers trained to dominate from above. American weapons that betrayed their users. And one Marine with a bow and artifact from another century stepping into a role no one expected him to fill. If you think ordinary skills from ordinary life can become extraordinary in the right moment, comment the number 7. If you think the Marines were insane for letting a man use a bow in modern war hit-like, and if you want to see how the sniper threat escalated from here, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss part 3. By the second week of December 1943, the Japanese sniper threat on Bougainville didn't just increase, it evolved, it matured, it hardened into a system designed to dismantle American movement meter by meter. Japanese commanders weren't guessing anymore. They were adapting. After Orchard killed the sniper on the night of the 14th Imperial units didn't retreat. They escalated. They activated 3 dedicated sniper detachments belonging to the 23rd Infantry Regiment. These weren't amateurs. These were specialist veterans pulled from operations in New Georgia, Kolombangara, and even Shanghai. Men trained in the Kokura Arsenal doctrine of tree fighting, a tactical style, built for one purpose: make the jungle a vertical battlefield. Each detachment moved with precision. 3-man cells, 1 shooter with a Type 97, 1 spotter with binoculars and an Arisaka infantry rifle, 1 auxiliary carrying rope lines, camouflage nets and supplies. They operated independently within a radius of 400 to 600 yards, overlapping visual fields creating kill zones where any movement, even a hand raised to wipe sweat, triggered a shot. In the 72 hours after Orchard's first silent kill, these detachments accounted for 9 American casualties in the 3rd Raider Battalion alone. Another 13 were hit across adjacent regiments of the Americal Division. Most shots came from above 15 feet. Some came from as high as 30. Several bodies displayed entry wounds from downward angles steep enough to indicate shooters perched near the upper canopy. A terrifying elevation for any soldier to imagine because you couldn't fight back. You couldn't even aim up without exposing your face, and a Marine exposing his face to the tree line lasted 3 seconds at most. The veteran raiders felt the shift immediately. On December 11th, before Orchard's engagement, sniper fire had been sporadic, deadly, yes, but inconsistent. By December 13th, the Japanese fire became rhythmic, almost timed, arriving in cycles that mirrored American routines. Mortarmen moving ammunition at dawn, sniper fire. Company runners approaching the command post at midday, sniper fire. Corpsmen carrying wounded in improvised litters at dusk, sniper fire. The Japanese weren't improvising. They were reading patterns like hunters read tracks. The turning point came on the afternoon of December 12th. A Marine named Carter moved 5 feet outside the perimeter to retrieve a canteen dropped during a previous firefight. He wasn't upright. He wasn't careless. He crawled body flush to the ground, elbows dragging through the mud. The shot entered through the base of his helmet and killed him instantly. The distance was 39 yards. The angle indicated the sniper had been sitting high around 14 meters. And what terrified the battalion staff wasn't just the precision, it was the timing. Carter had crawled into a shaded patch beneath a tree where the mud was soft. The Japanese sniper waited until the man's head aligned with a knot in the tree trunk. The sniper used the tree itself as a natural sight reference. That level of patience was doctrine level, not improvisation. By nightfall on the 13th, the Marines were boxed into a position barely 45 meters across, forced to move through trenches cut by entrenching tools, unable to stand, barely able to breathe. The rain didn't help. It came in sheets, drenching gear, softening earthworks, increasing the difficulty of digging in. Every hour of rainfall lowered the sound threshold of the jungle by another decibel, meaning even minor noises, metal scraping packs, shifting boots sinking, became identifiable to trained ears. And the Japanese had many trained ears. When Orchard reported to the platoon leader that he believed he had seen movement in the treetops, on the night of the 14th, just hours before his first bow shot, the lieutenant dismissed him. Marines weren't used to looking up. It wasn't instinctive. Years of doctrine taught them to search brush lines, ridge crests, gullies, not branches, not leaves, not shadows high above. But Orchard had learned to look up long before he wore a uniform. The animals he tracked in Idaho often bedded in higher terrain, using ridge angles and moonlight to escape predators. It was a way of thinking that military training didn't teach but never contradicted. And on Bougainville, it proved essential. After the silent kill, Orchard's name spread through the battalion with the speed of rumour and the weight of necessity. Men whispered about the Marine who shot a sniper with an arrow. Some didn't believe it. Others didn't care whether it was true or not. They cared that anything had successfully stopped the invisible threat. But success breeds scrutiny. Officers wanted confirmation, staff wanted facts, and the Japanese wanted revenge. The escalation came swiftly. The night after Orchard's first kill, the Japanese deployed a two-man sniper pair 200 yards west of the raider perimeter. This pair was different. They didn't fire at random, they didn't go for morale shots, they went for command. At 1840, a staff sergeant adjusting map coordinates near a lantern shield was targeted. The bullet missed by 2 inches only because a gust of wind hit the canopy at that exact moment. At 1905, the Japanese fired again, hitting a runner in the lower back. By 1911, the pair had relocated, shifting 50 yards north to a banyan branch that gave them a clearer view of the American supply trail. They waited for mules. When the supply team moved at 2010, the Japanese fired again, killing the mule driver with a shot to the side of the head. American officers estimated the pair fired 8 shots in one evening, all within a circle smaller than a dining table. It was around this time Orchard realized something no one else had noticed. The Japanese weren't guessing when to fire. They were predicting. He observed that every shot occurred during moments of micro-silence pauses, in windbreaks, in insect noise dips, in ambient jungle sound. These environmental pockets lasted between 2 and 7 seconds. In Idaho, hunters called them the quiet windows moments when nature holds its breath. Orchard's father used them to take longbow shots at mule deer at dusk. The Japanese used them to kill Marines. This recognition gave Orchard an edge no one else had. While others waited for flashes, he waited for silence. He mapped the rhythm of the jungle, and once he recognized the windows, he understood their pattern: 6 windows per minute at night, 3 per minute during rainfall, sometimes fewer when wind stirred the canopy. That realization made the Japanese sniper teams predictable, not in their positions, but in their firing timing. On December 15th, Orchard approached the platoon commander with a proposal bold enough to verge on insubordination: send him out again. No rifle, just his bow. The lieutenant refused at first. They needed riflemen, not experiments. But the sniper attacks were suffocating the battalion. Movement had dropped by 60%. Casualty evacuation slowed to a crawl. Patrols had been cut entirely. Every hour, Marines became more entangled in their own fear. Desperation reopened doors. At 22:14 on the 15th, Orchard got his permission. The Japanese pair that night was perched on a split limb 20 feet above the ground, roughly 70 yards west. Orchard crawled for 23 minutes, advancing just 16 meters, controlling every exhale. The Japanese fired twice during his approach, both shots killing men caught outside cover. Orchard reached a fallen log at the 35-yard mark, well within longbow range. He waited for a quiet window. The jungle dimmed, the wind paused, the insects stopped. He rose enough to clear the log. Drew, released. The arrow travelled just over 0.5 seconds. It struck the spotter first, the arrow entering through the jaw and lodging behind the ear. The shooter froze. Orchard fired again within 5 seconds, a speed impossible with a rifle without alerting the entire Japanese perimeter. The second arrow hit the shooter beneath the sternum. By midnight, the raider lines could finally move again. Orchard had become something the battalion lacked: a counter-sniper who could strike without betraying position. And the Japanese understood it instantly. They escalated again. If you believe the enemy adapts the moment you change the rules, comment 7. If you think Orchard's success made the situation more dangerous, hit like. And make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next when the Japanese turn their full attention on the man with the bow is where the story takes its sharpest turn. By December 17, 1943, the Japanese command finally understood the pattern. Every time a sniper team disappeared without a sound, it happened in sectors where a single Marine, unremarkable in rank, unremarkable in assignment, armed with a weapon that didn't exist in their doctrine, had been spotted crawling through the undergrowth. They didn't know his name, they didn't know his role, but they knew this somewhere inside the raider perimeter. There was a silent killer operating outside the rules of warfare they understood. And when the Japanese don't understand something, they don't ignore it. They eliminate it. Just after 21:00 on the 17th, 3 Japanese sniper detachments received an unusual order: hunt the American bowman. Not the platoon, not the battalion, one man. The order was relayed in coded fragments over field telephones strung through bamboo poles. The phrasing was clinical: remove the shadow in the trees. The Japanese believed he fought from elevation because no one could imagine a ground-level shooter striking with that precision and vanishing without muzzle flash or sound. The misreading worked in Orchard's favour. For a moment. The night that followed began with rain, a thick tropical downpour, the kind that drowns sound and blinds vision. Rain in Bougainville changed the battlefield. It forced snipers to reposition because water dripping onto scopes created distortions. It softened perches. It muddied climbing points. At 22:11, just as the rain hit its peak intensity over 3 inches per hour, Orchard detected movement 60 yards northwest. Not footsteps. No Marine could hear footsteps in this rain. What he heard was canopy shift, a branch bending under a weight that didn't belong to wind. He counted the sway. 1 second oscillation. Too heavy to be a bird, too slow to be a monkey. Human, elevated, armed. He moved. South to north, low crawl, 30 yards in 12 minutes. Every inch controlled, every breath measured. Rainwater filled depressions in the ground, turning shallow pits into pools. Orchard slid through them anyway, using the water to mask his movements, letting the rain swallow the sound of his elbows dragging through mud. At 22:49, he reached a fallen tree 35 yards from the suspected sniper perch. He waited for a lull in the wind. He held position for nearly 3 minutes. To the men watching him, men who didn't even know he had left the perimeter, 3 minutes was the length of a cigarette. To Orchard, 3 minutes was a battlefield lifetime. Then the wind fell still. He rose just high enough to angle his bow. In the darkness, he saw the faintest glint of metal, likely the locking collar of the Type 97 scope, tilting as the sniper adjusted for a clearer view. Orchard released his arrow. It flew a high arc, compensating for the rain's downward pull and the 50-foot elevation of the target. It struck the sniper high in the chest, knocking him out of the tree. The man hit branches at 30 feet, then 20, then 12 before crashing into mud. Silence lasted less than 4 seconds. A second Japanese sniper fired instantly, a shot so precise and so fast that it tore bark from the log beside Orchard's head. This wasn't a partner. This was a backup, a reserve shooter positioned 80 yards northeast, pre-sighted along likely American approach routes. That meant the Japanese had prepared a counter-ambush not for a patrol, but specifically for him. Orchard dropped flat as another round cracked overhead. The shooter was alternating positions, firing from 2 branches of the same tree to create a false line of origin. A classic Japanese deception tactic used only by elite marksmen. Orchard recognized the signature because the sound spacing matched 2 fixed points, not 1. He didn't need to see the shooter. He needed to understand his rhythm. 3 shots, pause, shift. 2 shots, pause, shift again. It was a perfect sniper trap designed to flush out a counter-sniper with a rifle. But Orchard didn't have a rifle. He had a bow, so he stayed still. He let the rhythm run. 20 seconds, 40 seconds, a minute. The Japanese marksman fired a 5th shot at the log, another at a patch of grass 6 inches behind Orchard. They weren't guessing. They were bracketing, closing in. At this distance, Orchard needed a clear window. No rain gust, no leaf movement, no branch sway. He needed the shooter to give away something, anything. He got it. At 23:04, the sniper raised his rifle too high, breaking his silhouette against a lighter patch of sky. Barely visible, but enough. Orchard rolled left, raised the bow, aimed without thinking, instinct, pure instinct born from years of twilight hunting, drew and fired. This shot was different, longer, harder. 70 yards through rain between tree trunks angling upward. The arrow hit the sniper below the left clavicle. The impact knocked him backward. He crashed through vines, snapping them as he fell. Orchard waited to see if he moved. He didn't. 2 sniper kills, one night. More significant than any officer realized yet. But Orchard knew immediately that something had changed. The Japanese weren't scattering. They weren't retreating. They were converging. At 23:18, Orchard heard low whispers in the tree line. Not one voice, multiple. The Japanese were closing in, triangulating the arrow impact points to estimate Orchard's location. He withdrew carefully inch by inch, dragging himself through mud until he reached an eroded ditch 12 yards to the south. He sank inside, allowing water to rise to his chest. The ditch stank of rot and stagnant rainwater. But it gave him cover. The shapes arrived minutes later. 4. No 5 silhouettes moving in slow arcs, rifles angled low search pattern radius tight. They weren't standard infantry. Their movements were too measured, too silent. They were supporting elements of the sniper detachments trained to retrieve bodies, recover equipment, and kill any Americans who attempted counter-sniper approaches. One soldier kneeled next to the fallen sniper Orchard had killed first. 2 moved to the second body. Orchard held his breath and sank deeper. He knew the risk. If they found so much as a footprint, they would fan out and sweep. And they did find something, one broken vine snapped by Orchard's knee during his escape. The nearest Japanese soldier turned immediately. He followed the disturbance like a bloodhound. He walked directly toward the ditch. 10 yards, 8, 6. Orchard gripped his bow underwater, the wood swelling from moisture. He had 1 dry arrow left. 1. He waited until the soldier stepped to the ditch, lip peering down, eyes scanning. Orchard rose with no hesitation. He fired point blank. The arrow hit under the chin. The man fell backward, gurgling. The others reacted instantly. Orchard sprinted out of the ditch, zigzagging through the brush as bullets exploded behind him. He dove behind a massive tree buttress, heart pounding so hard it vibrated the water-soaked earth. The Japanese had expected a rifleman. Instead, they faced a ghost. And by the end of the night, they knew they didn't have a sniper problem. They had an Orchard problem. If you believe this was the moment the war shifted from cat and mouse to hunter versus hunter, comment 7. If you think Orchard should never have gone out alone, hit like. And subscribe now, because Part 5 reveals what happens when the Japanese attempt to break an entire marine company just to kill one man. By dawn on December 18th, word of Orchard's night battle had already travelled beyond the radar perimeter. Not through radio, not through runners, through the only channel faster than official reports fear, Japanese fear. For the first time since the Bougainville landings, Imperial units operating in the central sector submitted nearly identical field notes, unknown enemy marksmen, operating without sound, kills executed without muzzle flash impact points inconsistent with rifle fire, likely silent weapon. The phrase appeared in 4 separate Japanese after-action logs between 0300 and 0500. That alone was remarkable because Japanese units rarely admitted confusion. But Orchard had done more than kill 3 snipers in one night. He had ruptured the doctrine the Japanese relied on. Tree fighting, the tactic that made Bougainville a sniper's paradise, depended on 3 assumptions. Elevation creates dominance, concealment creates immunity, and sound betrays only the enemy. Orchard shattered all 3. He killed from below. He struck concealed targets without revealing himself. He removed sound from the battlefield. That forced a recalibration across the entire Japanese sector. Snipers who typically operated from 12 to 20 meters up began dropping to lower perches. Some stayed on the ground, entirely abandoning height advantage, for fear of falling victim to an unseen archer. That shift alone changed the entire geometry of the battlefield. American intelligence estimates later confirmed it. Sniper activity dropped by nearly 60% in the 6 days following Orchard's operations. The Japanese didn't stop shooting. They stopped taking elevated positions. They stopped dominating movement corridors. They stopped hunting with confidence. And when a sniper loses confidence, he loses initiative. In jungle warfare, initiative is the difference between paralysis and momentum. The raiders regained momentum almost immediately. Patrols which had been halted for 72 hours resumed by mid-afternoon on the 18th. The casualty evacuation route previously cut off by overlapping sniper lanes reopened after Orchard's kills forced the Japanese off their vantage points. The battalion surgeon later wrote in his journal that Orchard's actions created the first window of free movement we'd seen in days. He wasn't exaggerating. For 3 full days, no unit had crossed the western trench line without losing a man. But within 12 hours of Orchard's counter-sniper work, 12 wounded Marines were evacuated successfully, all alive. On the Japanese side, the effect was even more pronounced. The tree platforms, some of which had taken hours to carve into limbs as thick as a man's torso, were abandoned. Their camouflage nets were left hanging in branches without occupants. Their climbing ropes, previously used for stealthy vertical ascents, were pulled down to avoid becoming arrow magnets. Even Japanese spotters, normally cool and methodical, became jittery. They reported hearing whispers in the brush, shadows that moved, arrows materializing from angles rifles could not reach. It wasn't sorcery, it was psychology. The Japanese had no equivalent concept for a silent long-range projectile capable of killing without signature. Their doctrine had no counter to it. Their training didn't address it. When an army encounters a weapon it cannot interpret, it invents myth. Orchard became that myth. But his impact wasn't limited to fear. His bow became a multi-tool, a force multiplier in ways even he didn't anticipate. On December 19th, during a reconnaissance patrol near a dried creek bed, Orchard used an arrow tied with fishing line to sever a Japanese field telephone wire, strung 6 feet above the ground. The line carried communications between 2 forward positions. The cut disabled coordination for hours. On December 20th, he used an arrow to carry det cord over a ridge, too exposed for a Marine to cross upright. The Marines pulled the cord back, attached an explosive, and destroyed a Japanese ammo cache hidden beneath palm trunks. A rifle couldn't do that. A grenade couldn't reach. But a bow could. The ripple spread upward as well. When Battalion Command realized the Japanese were now operating at ground level, their entire tactical approach shifted. Machine gun teams adjusted arcs of fire to dominate the forest floor instead of aiming high. Mortar crews changed their elevation angles to hit shallow perches rather than canopy clusters. Scouts began moving in low formations previously considered too dangerous. The battlefield, once vertical, began flattening. And none of this would have happened without a detail so small it bordered on absurd, a quiet shot in a noisy war. 1 bowstring release, 1 arrow arc, 1 moment of silence that changed a week of combat. Even American officers skeptical of Orchard's methods began to acknowledge the results. Captain Reynolds, who had initially dismissed the idea of sending a man into a sniper-infested jungle armed with a weapon from another century, wrote a formal note to Battalion HQ acknowledging Orchard as operationally decisive. Colonel Whitman's report went further, stating that Orchard's work disrupted enemy sniper doctrine to a measurable degree. That phrase, to a measurable degree, was not a compliment. It was data. It meant Orchard wasn't inspiring morale. He was altering battlefield math. The Japanese noticed too. Their journals expressed something rarely documented frustration. One diary entry recovered months later reads, "The American moves like wind. No sound. No light. No trace. Very dangerous. Another tree not safe. Ground not safe. Night not safe. Hunters don't fear prey, they fear the thing that hunts hunters." Orchard had become that thing. But ripple effects never come without consequence. By removing Japanese snipers from the treetops, Orchard forced them onto the forest floor exactly where they became more mobile, less predictable, and more aggressive. The Japanese response to fear wasn't retreat. It was retaliation. And within 48 hours, Orchard would find himself facing not scattered sniper pairs, but coordinated multi-squad sweeps designed to eliminate him entirely. If you believe 1 silent shot can change the direction of an entire battle, comment 7. If you think silencing the snipers only made the Japanese more dangerous hit-like. And make sure you subscribe, because part 6 reveals what this war meant to Orchard, not as a marksman, but as a man. The jungle didn't care who fired the loudest weapon. It didn't care who carried rank, who carried fear, or who carried orders sealed with official stamps. Bougainville reduced every man to the same equation, breath, heartbeat. Silence, survival. And in that brutal equality, Orchard stood apart not because he was stronger or braver, but because he brought something no one else carried into that jungle memory. Every arrow he loosed carried the weight of a childhood, shaped by forests thousands of miles away, forests that taught him to read stillness the way others read maps. The bow was not an oddity, it was an inheritance. To understand Orchard's role, you have to strip away the numbers, the casualty tables, the patrol logs, and look at the man as he actually existed. A 24-year-old Marine whose file described him in 3 words: average in everything. Average shot with the rifle, average fitness scores, average performance in close order drill, a man the Corps would have classified as replaceable if anyone had asked. But war doesn't test men in the categories the military expects. War tests them in the categories no one measures. Orchard's gifts, patient pattern recognition, instinctive reading of landscape didn't register on any training sheet. Yet they shaped every inch of his choices in that jungle. The Japanese snipers brought discipline crafted through years of formal training. Orchard brought the discipline of necessity. In Idaho, missing a target didn't lead to death, but it meant going hungry, disappointing a father, learning humility in silence. Precision was not glory, it was survival. That mindset followed him to Bougainville, where every mistake carried consequences measured not in meals missed, but in lives lost. And it explains why Orchard never flinched when officers questioned his methods, why he never defended himself, why he never bragged. He wasn't improvising a new kind of combat. He was reverting to the only kind he had ever practiced. There was symbolism in his weapon, but it wasn't romantic. It wasn't a return to ancient warfare. It wasn't rebellion. The bow represented something far more personal, the idea that a man's past, however ordinary, can become decisive in circumstances no one predicted. In a war defined by machine guns, artillery, tanks, and industrial-scale destruction, Orchard proved that a quiet skill carried from the quietest part of the map can tilt the balance of violence. The Marines around him saw this transformation clearly. They had watched men break under sniper fire, watched squads freeze under invisible pressure, watched fear constrict every movement until the entire perimeter felt like a trap. And then they watched one man crawl into that darkness with nothing but woodstring steel and nerve. Orchard didn't become a symbol because he killed snipers. He became a symbol because he restored motion to men who had stopped believing motion was safe. He gave them something almost extinct in those nights, a sense that control, however small, was still possible. The Japanese sensed it too. Their fear of the silent weapon wasn't superstition, it was recognition. They had spent years mastering camouflage, elevation, and surprise, only to be undone by a man who understood silence more deeply than they did. In their diaries, their phrasing wasn't dramatic. It was weary. They wrote of branches that no longer felt secure, shadows that felt watched, angles they had trusted now compromised. Orchard didn't just kill snipers, he dismantled the psychology of an entire tactic. But the deepest symbolism of Orchard's presence on Bougainville lies in the way war absorbed him. Each arrow was a reminder of a world outside the jungle, a world with snow, clear skies, quiet valleys, open horizons. Yet every arrow also tied him more tightly to the men beside him, men who depended on his silence, the way others depended on machine guns. In those nights he wasn't a hunter, not really. He was a lifeline. And that is why Orchard's story survives. Not because he was extraordinary, but because he carried something ordinary into a place where ordinary skills became extraordinary salvation. If you believe a man's past can save him in the darkest moment of his present, comment 7. If you think war turns every quiet lesson into a weapon, hit like. And if you want to see how this story closes, the final reflection, the final tension, the final question, make sure you're subscribed for part 7. When the fighting on Bougainville finally eased, when the nights no longer pulsed with invisible rifles, and the jungle no longer held its breath. Waiting for the next shot, Orchard walked out of the perimeter carrying the same bow he had carried in. Damp wood, frayed string, feathers flattened by rain, a weapon unfit for any modern army yet powerful enough to carve silence out of chaos. No medal recorded those nights, no citation mentioned arrows cutting through rain. But every Marine who lived because Orchard moved through the dark without sound understood exactly what that bow had done. It bought time, it bought space, it bought survival. The war moved on. New battles, new islands, new tactics. But Orchard's story remained the kind that doesn't fade. It stayed in the quiet places in after-action notes scribbled by tired officers, in the private memories of men who watched him crawl toward dangers they couldn't see, in the Japanese diaries that tried to explain the unexplainable. His legacy was not a tally of kills. It was the reminder that wars are not always won by the strongest weapon, the loudest explosion, or the highest rank. Sometimes a battle changes because one man decides to use the one skill no one else remembered he had. So now the question turns to you. What would you have done in that jungle if the tree line was alive with rifles aimed at your brothers, if every movement risked death, if firing your weapon meant exposing everyone beside you? Would you trust a single silent shot? Would you trade the certainty of steel for the uncertainty of instinct? Would you crawl into blackness with nothing but a bowstring between you and disaster? There is no easy answer. But the question matters because it forces us to confront the truth at the center of every war story. Survival isn't just tactics and weapons, it is judgment, courage, fear pressed into action. It is one person stepping forward when everyone else is frozen in place. If that resonates with you, if you believe that a quiet skill carried from an ordinary life can become the single difference between living and dying, comment the number 7 right now. Tell me you see the value in the small things that tip the balance. If you disagree, if you believe war belongs only to machines and modern firepower, hit like. And before you go, subscribe. Because stories like this, stories that live between official records, stories that slip through the cracks and survive only because someone remembers, deserve to be heard, deserve to be recorded, deserve to be kept alive.